and welcome to my series, The Finished Story Arcs of Star Wars The Clone Wars, which comprises of the 3 story arcs that were chosen to be finished in 2020. In this video, we will be covering the third and final of these, the Siege of Mandalore. Please note, there will be spoilers for Revenge of the Sith, the Ahsoka novel, Tales of the Jedi, The Bad Batch, and Rebels. Before 2020, this story arc was the 13th and the final arc to be left unfinished after the cancellation of the Clone Wars in March 2013. Originally planned as the finale to the 20-episode 8th season, this story arc was always intended to end the show, but would have released a lot later than it did, with another 40 episodes planned to have come beforehand that are still unfinished. When Disney Plus ordered a Clone Wars revival as part of its launch, this story arc was chosen as the third out of 3 arcs to be finished. Originally, this story arc took up production code 721, 722, 723, and 724 as the 6th and final arc of the 7th production season, most likely being planned to air as the last 4 episodes of Season 8, being episodes 17, 18, 19, and 20. When this arc was chosen to be finished for the twins' final season production, it adopted the production codes 109, 110, 111, and 112. This story arc was written by Dave Filoni, being the only story arc out of the Clone Wars production to contain a solo writer credit to him. While it's been said somewhere that Matt Michnovetz was the writer of the original version, I'm not sure whether to believe that, as why would he have his credit removed but be kept for the Twins production / 2020 version of the Bad Batch arc? I also think that Matt Michnovetz was the one to write the unfinished Padme Return to Moncala arc from the same production season, with there being a pattern of him only having 1 arc per production season with a solo writer credit. The past 2 production seasons, being 5 and 6, seem to have 1 guest writer on a story arc, with the disappeared from production 5 being Jonathan W. Rinsler, and production 6 being Ida Mashaka Kroll on the still unfinished Son of Dathomir arc. Considering they decided to end the Clone Wars with production season 7, I can see Dave being given the chance to act as a guest writer, mixed with them maybe not having enough time to hire a guest writer due to the impending Disney acquisition at the time. It's also possible they gave Dave the final arc to write because the upcoming Disney acquisition could have possibly meant that he wouldn't get the chance to write something else, with them not knowing that they get to do Rebels until later. Matt Michnovetz could have still known details about the Siege of Mandalore due to him being the head writer of the last 2 original Clone Wars production seasons. Had this story arc been finished in the original production as intended, it would have most likely released in early 2016, around the same time as the Twilight of the Apprentice episodes of Star Wars Rebels. We start Old Friends Not Forgotten with the show's music being replaced with the theme used for the live-action Star Wars movies. It is unknown whether this would have also been the case had the episode been completed during the original production. Though, as this seems to have been done to honour it as the last story created by George Lucas, its use would most likely depend on whether or not he'd still have been at the company for the episode's completion come its 2016 deadline. The title of the episode itself could have also changed from its draft scripts, considering it seems to refer to Ahsoka's reunion with Anakin and Obi-Wan, which was originally part of the still unfinished Return to the Jedi arc that featured the Sith Shrine. Whether the draft scripts had titles for their episodes is unknown, but I assume they must have done, considering the Saving Voss arc has confirmed titles, and that story arc was also at draft script stage at the time of the cancellation. The Bounty Hunter arc and the Kashyyyk arc, due to being unreleased in any format, also don't have their episode titles publicly released, but they no doubt have them considering the story arcs with production episodes after them do, as well as them getting further along the development track than draft script stage. The intro sequence shows Depa Billaba and her Padawan Caleb Doom also known as Kanan Jarrus. While it's possible Depot could have appeared in the original episode due to already having an animated model created for the Crystal Crisis on Utapau story arc, Kanan would have most likely not appeared due to him being a character created for Star Wars Rebels. Though during the 5-month period between October 2012 and March 2013, where it seemed possible that the Clone Wars could have continued all the way to its planned 8th season ending, and while early talks for Rebels were also going on, Kanan could have potentially been added here as a little bit of backdoor connection during production for the arc, had it gone ahead under Disney. We also get to see an updated version of the General Grievous model created for the Crystal Crisis arc, but sadly it's in one single shot and isn't used again in this show. The model would have been used for General Grievous's remaining appearances within the Clone Wars, spanning the original planned full-length seasons 6, 7 and 8, had production not been cancelled. Luckily, this model will get some more use, being briefly seen again in the Bad Batch, and getting to be more fully used in the first few minutes of the first episode of Tales of the Empire, showing us Grievous fighting with his cape in 3D animation for the first time. Moving into the episode itself, it is most likely that the Anakin and Obi-Wan battle sequence would have played out the same due to Pablo Hidalgo confirming its existence from the story conference. Though the indirect visual reference to The Last Jedi would have not existed due to said movie not existing at either the time of the cancellation or the original probable release time frame of early 2016. The reference to Fulcrum would have not appeared in the original version of this story, considering that that was a codename created during the development of Star Wars Rebels, complete with the Ahsoka novel giving that name a completely different origin. We are then shown an updated version of the scene shown during the 2018 teaser trailer, with a few noticeable differences. The first is the overall visual appearance having been updated, which includes Bo-Katan's character model, including the addition of her Night Owl crest on her helmet as seen in Rebels, something that was absent in both previous episodes of the Clone Wars, as well as her helmet in the teaser trailer, suggesting that they had not yet updated it at the time the trailer was made. The second difference is the appearance of Yularen instead of Rex. To me, it is obvious Rex was only there for the teaser, because the episode around this scene has established him as being on planet, and then instantly going to make the 3-3-second helmet, with him not interacting with Ahsoka until she sees him in the hangar. Why people think we were potentially robbed of Rex being in this scene when it doesn't make sense with the surrounding context of the episode, I have no idea. Anakin, while initially seeming like he hasn't seen Ahsoka since she left in Season 5, acts vague enough without explicitly stating exactly when he last saw her for the Sith Shrine arc where Ahsoka briefly returns to the Jedi to help rescue Yoda to still be able to be slotted in a gap in the timeline. This would most likely be between Season 5 and the Walkabout arc, with Ahsoka still not rejoining the Order, so her story in Ahsoka's Walkabout can still play out as it does in the quote final season. It is possible that the mention of the events of the Ahsoka's Walkabout arc on Obadiah would have also been added in this 2020 Twins version of the episode, considering originally the events of Obadiah would have played out much earlier in the timeline than this story arc, an entire 2 seasons earlier, with Ahsoka having already seen Anakin since then in the unfinished Sith Shrine arc. Though those mentions could have existed if that arc originally did have Olmec pulling the strings of the Shadow Collective, as that would have played back into this arc with Olmec working for Maul, and it have Ahsoka finally put the pieces together after being puzzled as to why the Pikes were working for him, with them also potentially briefing each other about when the Jedi last saw Maul at Vizsla Keep 09 in the Son of Dathomir arc. It's possible that the Ahsoka's Walkabout references could have replaced more direct references to the Son of Dathomir arc, considering that story sadly wasn't chosen to be finished and is still counted as an unfinished arc despite its release in comic form. A sequence we know that wasn't originally planned for this episode was the return of Ahsoka's lightsabers, as Ahsoka would have originally regained them in the unfinished Sith Shrine arc. The trivia guide for this episode backs this up, confirming that the sequence was added when the Siege of Mandalore plot was revived for the Twins production. Ahsoka's lightsabers being blue was also a change made when this arc was revived, as it was a choice by Dave Filoni to show Anakin's caring yet possessive relationship to Ahsoka, with the Ahsoka novel originally confirming that the lightsabers were still green. Interesting to note that the sketches for this story arc only depict Ahsoka with one of her green lightsabers. This makes me think it's possible that originally she'd have only had one of them in this story arc, either only being returned one in the Sith Shrine arc, or her breaking one of them in that arc when she jammed it into the holocron vault door to protect it against Palpatine. Obi-Wan's mention of losing contact with Shaak Ti, in my opinion, confirms that the events of the 2D Clone Wars Battle of Coruscant are loosely counted as having happened, considering Shaak Ti's appearance and death on the Invisible Hand was cut from the final version of Revenge of the Sith, with an earlier episode of the Clone Wars confirming her actual death was by Anakin in the Jedi Temple during Order 66 after the Battle of Coruscant. Gar Saxon and Rook Kast make their first on-screen Clone Wars appearance in this episode, considering their known original premiere arc, Son of Dathomir, is one of the 10 story arcs that are still left unfinished. Though due to the comic release, fans know the core story beats of that arc, even if its specific details can't be considered canon due to the practice of on-screen media altering the details of print-based stories, something this arc does a lot with the Ahsoka novel. Gar Saxon's Twins 109 character model contains a few references to a CW525 manned med male supercommando, which is interesting considering CW525 is the production code for the fourth and final episode of the unfinished Bounty Hunter arc, suggesting that either Mandalorian supercommandos appeared in that episode or that Gar Saxon's model is sourced from Boba Fett's armour, though why they'd label Boba's model with a generic Mando title, I don't know. If Mando Super Commandos did appear in that episode, maybe that episode could explain why the Hutts left the Shadow Collective, and maybe have secretly been the first appearance of Gar Saxon, with him not getting named by that point in production, only being seen as a generic Mando before he showed up as Son of Dathomir an entire production season later. Returning to the topic of the Ahsoka novel, this is where we reach its first major contradiction, being that Ahsoka in the on-screen episode confronts Maul in the sewers, whereas in the Ahsoka novel, she confronts him in the town square. Maul expecting Obi-Wan seems to be a direct follow-up to his promise in the third episode of the Son of Dathomir arc, titled Proxy War, in that he states to Kenobi that he will see him again soon. We move on to the second episode of this story arc with The Phantom Apprentice. This is the first episode of the Clone Wars to skip the opening narration and continue on with the plot without it or a fortune cookie. It is unknown if this was always the intended case, with it being possible that this episode and the two after it have narrations and fortune cookies that were cut to increase the effect of this being the final arc of the show. The Force Awakens is referenced when Maul uses the intense Force mind reading Kylo Ren used on Poe Dameron to read Jesse's mind. This is something that was most likely originally a standard Force choke in the original draft script, considering the absence of that movie's existence at the time this arc was originally being planned out. Jesse would have most likely verbally given Maul the information instead, with it still probably taking place off-screen. Obi-Wan's hologram would have most likely not have had robes had this episode been finished in the original production, due to how much more costly they were to animate back then. This story arc confirms the survival of Mark Krim, undoing his implied death from the Dark Disciple novel. While he did appear in Ahsoka's Walkabout, the timeline of that arc was less clear until this episode aired, due to the original plans for that arc placing it before Dark Disciple. The whole scene of Maul consulting with his syndicate would have been absent from the draft scripted version of this episode, due to the fact that he was originally supposed to lose his syndicate at the conclusion of the Son of Dathomir arc, returning to Mandalore as the only thing he had left, something Rebels originally went with too, considering he no longer had his syndicate in that either. It's not hard to guess that Dryden Voss was also absent from the original draft script too, considering Solo a Star Wars story also didn't exist yet. The trivia guide confirms that Zita Moj's model was reworked from his existing older original production model, having not appeared in any previous episodes in the twins' production, unlike Mark Krim. The Son of Dathomir arc gets a reference when Maul refers to Rook and Gar Saxon once rescuing him from the clutches of Sidious. It is still a shame that that important story was never finished on screen, especially considering how much of a threat Maul seems to see Sidious as. A lot of viewers of the arc will be unaware that Sidious went to great lengths to lure out and kill Mother Talzin, and is the reason she has not appeared since the Disappeared Part 2, as well as the big reveal that she was Maul's actual mother. Having this information would have recontextualized Maul's fear of Sidious, considering he knows not only has he got this grand master plan, but that someone as powerful as Mother Talzin was unable to stop him. The major set piece of this episode, the duel between Ahsoka and Maul, is the one and only duel in this show to have actual motion capture use for it. This allowed Ray Park to return to the role of Maul, while Ahsoka was played by Lauren Mary Kim. Had this episode been completed in the original production, I doubt this would have been the case, with this being the reason why Maul returned having a double-bladed lightsaber. The original duel would have most likely had Maul with a single-bladed lightsaber, with either his single blade from previous episodes of the Clone Wars, or more likely, the Darksaber, with its absence not being acknowledged at all during this whole arc. If Maul was to have the Darksaber in the original draft script, I believe Ahsoka would have also only had one saber to counter him, just like she only has one lightsaber in the sketches for this story arc. The sketch of Ahsoka force pushing Maul seems to confirm this, with Maul having the Darksaber and Ahsoka having only one of her sabers. While the duel ends with Maul being taken into custody in this on-screen version, the Ahsoka novel suggested a different outcome. Before the duel had even began, Order 66 would have been activated, with Ahsoka having to choose between pursuing Maul or saving Rex, who had already somehow taken out his inhibitor chip beforehand. We come to the arc's third episode with Shattered. Ahsoka updates the Jedi on her progress, while not mentioning Maul's references of Sidious. This scene uses a mixture of new dialogue and archival dialogue from Revenge of the Sith. Ahsoka and Yoda's dynamic gives me the impression that the Sith Shrine arc has indeed happened at some point beforehand, with Yoda acting very grateful to her and respecting her feelings of not yet being ready to return to the Jedi Order. The original sketch we have for this conference call shows it from a Jedi Temple's perspective, with Obi-Wan also present. This is not the case in the finished version, as Obi-Wan's last appearance was in the previous episode. This episode again uses Revenge of the Sith archival audio when Ahsoka senses Anakin's fall, as well as when Palpatine activates Order 66. Pablo Hidalgo seemed to remember that at one point the astromech droids that helped Ahsoka were instead medical droids. He also confirms that Rex's inhibitor chip was always supposed to be removed in the original story beats of the arc. However, there is an obvious addition of the one with the Force speech from Rogue One that wouldn't have been present. We reach the conclusion of the Clone Wars with victory and death. While not mentioned in the final version of this episode, it is possible that the draft scripts had Maul refer to Ahsoka as Lady Tano, as that's the name he refers to her by in Star Wars Rebels. Dave's sketches seemingly show Maul using an escape pod instead of stealing a shuttle. Though I will note that as these sketches would have most likely been made before the final draft script was written, they could have changed it to the shuttle by then, just like how Yoda was swapped with Anakin for the infiltration sequences featured in the original Clone Wars production episodes 705 Saving Voss Part 1 and 706 Saving Voss Part 2. As depicted in the Dark Disciple novel. There is also a sketch of Ahsoka in the prison section of the Venator. Both of these, as well as what Pablo has said, confirm the events of Order 66 did happen on the Venator, as they do in the Twins production finished version. Rex's wiring flying skills could be the outcome of the unfinished Rex and R2 arc, where he could have been given flight training after he crash-landed on a Ryloth moon. Dave Filoni's sketch also seems to suggest that the Venator lands on the unknown planet it crashes on in the Twins produced final version, though this could very well be it landed on Mandalore in the previous episode before they left. The Ahsoka novel suggests that Ahsoka and Rex fake their deaths and instantly go their separate ways, while the episode instead shows us that they bury all of the clones who died from the crash of the Venator, and they don't instantly separate, as they're still together for the events of Padme's funeral in Tales of the Jedi. Ahsoka abandoning her lightsabers at the crash site signifies the death of her bond with Anakin. Ahsoka only dropping one saber could be another hint to her originally only having one lightsaber in this story arc, as previously stated, suggested by the sketches. At the time of the cancellation, this story arc had the least amount of development out of all of them, due to it being the 13th and final unfinished arc at the time. This means that it only had draft scripts written for it, with production on the story arc having never officially started. As previously mentioned, Dave Filoni created a bunch of sketches during the story conference sessions to give them a visual sense of how the story would have played out. With this, alongside the rest of the 7th and final production season being the only visual elements ever created for the story. An article by Film Fisher, linked in the description, makes a very good point about the contrasts between the relationship of Obi-Wan and Anakin to the relationship of Ahsoka and Rex, where Obi-Wan's Jedi teachings allow him to overlook his attachments to Anakin to try to save the galaxy from his turn to the dark side. Meanwhile, Ahsoka's loyalty and attachment to Rex is on full force when she tries to save him despite him attacking her. This is even reflected in how Order 66 affects both Cody and Rex, with Cody instantly turning on Obi-Wan compared to Rex, who is able to resist to try and save his friend. Ahsoka being out of the Order and focusing on the people at hand as seen in Walkabout and potentially in the unfinished Sith Shrine arc could also be a factor in why she's so set on saving Rex, having herself seen the Jedi as dogmatic since they turned their backs on her in Season 5. This story arc in its original placement as the full 8th season finale would have essentially been the arc that showed us what happened to the remaining characters of the show that didn't feature in Revenge of the Sith, with characters like Boba, Ventress and Talzin having had their end to their stories told in other story arcs that were planned to air before this one. While the Ahsoka novel suggests this story arc had drastic changes from its original version, I do not believe this to be the case, with Pablo Hidalgo confirming that all the story beats from the original story conference session are in the final version, which would be scripted out and evolved all the way throughout production, as is standard for any story. This leads me to believe that E.K. Johnston was given a different outline of the Siege of Mandalore to reference in the Ahsoka novel as a form of preventing the story arc from being spoiled. This could be explained as Ahsoka deliberately misremembering it because the real events of the siege are too personal to her, such as with the reveal that Maul was right about Anakin. The Ahsoka novel stating that Rex leaves his armor with Ahsoka's lightsabers not only contradicts this version of the story arc, but also Star Wars Rebels, where Rex is shown to still have his clone armor, giving more credence to the Ahsoka novel being a purposefully fabricated version of events. The Ahsoka novel version of the Siege of Mandalore seems way too short to consist of 4 22-minute episodes, as well as Order 66 occurring on Mandalore, making confirmed parts of the original Dave sketches impossible, as Ahsoka wouldn't have time to contact the Council or appoint Bo-Katan as provisional leader. Also, something as big as Rex having his inhibitor chip removed is something I don't see them having skipped over, considering their previous whole 4-episode story arc about it. The Dave Filoni sketches we have for this story arc seem to mostly match up with how the final version of the story arc is presented, with only small things such as character positions and perspectives being different. This is more evidence to support this as the true intended version of the arc over the reaccounted version in the Ahsoka novel. However, the Dave Filoni sketches have some specific detail differences due to the original drafts having the Sith Shrine arc in context, such as they seem to suggest that originally Ahsoka was to act more on behalf of the Jedi in this story, possibly hinting that at one point in development she had rejoined the Order in the Sith Shrine arc. This is represented in elements such as Ahsoka being promoted to General instead of Rex being promoted to Commander, as well as Ahsoka appointing Bo-Katan provisional leader on behalf of the Jedi. Ahsoka is interestingly featured in her Season 3 Jedi outfit in the sketches, though this could have been due to them not having yet decided what outfit she'd have worn at the time these sketches were created, with the Siege of Mandalore being the story arc with the least development at the time of the cancellation. Even if Ahsoka never officially rejoined the Order, her involvement in the siege could line up with how she was technically working as a free agent, or something like an ambassador for neutral systems for the Jedi, which is suggested in the early sketches for the Saving Voss arc, where she is the one to recruit Ventress on behalf of the Jedi Council. This would also then tie into the original pitch for the Production 7 Padme arc that had her team up with Ahsoka to seek audience with the Separatist Council in a bid to end the war, with the Separatist Council most likely not allowing a meeting with a Republic-affiliated Jedi. Though honestly, I doubt a final decision on whether Ahsoka would have fully returned to the Order by the end of the Sith Shrine arc, or just worked for them as a free agent, was ever made by the time the Clone Wars was cancelled, with specific details like these always being left in flux until a story is 100% finished, which of course, none of these stories ever were. Dave Filoni seems to have made his own decision on her not rejoining the Order during the development of Star Wars Rebels, with this then being reflected with these twins-produced episodes. The additional sketches of Maul being in long long robes and Ahsoka riding a giant wolf are aspects I don't think would have ever actually featured in this story arc, more likely just being ideas that Dave Filoni had that he wanted to visualise, with Ahsoka riding a wolf being created as a concept of what she could have gone on to do after the events of this story. It was also apparently said that Ahsoka riding a giant wolf by the end of the story was dropped by the final draft script they had anyway, and if they wanted to end the show on a sad note for the clones, like they did in the Twins produced version, it would have taken away from that finality. There was an official print made by Dave Filoni of Ahsoka riding on a wolf with her original Ahsoka's walkabout outfit that was released during Star Wars Celebration 2013 that people associate with this story arc. Due to this arc having zero assets created for it during the original production, the Lothal sewers were taken from Rebels and refitted for this story. Maul's double-bladed lightsaber consists of the half he had in earlier episodes of the Clone Wars, as well as the reused asset of what was meant to be Ventress's yellow-bladed lightsaber from the Dark Disciple arc. Why they did this instead of just having Maul use Savage's double-bladed saber, I don't know, as both were seemingly lost in the same battle against Sidious in the Lawless anyway. This has created an unnecessary continuity issue with Ventress's yellow lightsaber hilt design, being the second thing that the Twins production has changed from the Dark Disciple novel after the change of Mar Grimm's implied death. While it's always possible that Maul could have stolen Ventress's old saber hilt after she died for his own use, it's more likely that the curved hilt she has in the Bad Batch is now the saber she has in Dark Disciple. The Mandalorian shuttle that appears to try and rescue Maul after his duel with Ahsoka could be the Night Brother, piloted by another Mandalorian who, like a Rook cast, is voiced by Vanessa Marshall. This could suggest that this particular Mandalorian continues to work with Maul post the Siege of Mandalore, considering the Night Brother is within his possession all the way until his death on Tatooine in Rebels. It's also possible that this Mandalorian could be Rookcast herself, as it doesn't seem that she gets arrested alongside Gar Saxon, as the female Mandalorian next to him is helmeted and seems to be one of the generic models. This could potentially hint at a future animated show that stars Maul and Rook cast, explaining why she isn't featured in anything after Clone Wars, and would also explain how Vanessa Marshall knows that more animated projects are coming, as she stated at D23 2024 back in August. It's also possible that Lucasfilm might secretly be working on more Clone Wars and have used Vanessa in a finished version of the Son of Dathomir arc. However unlikely it may be, I will always have hope. The references to this story arc in the Rebels Twilight of the Apprentice episodes is possibly a real-life reference to when this story arc would have been planned to air had the Clone Wars not been cancelled. It would not surprise me if the first two production episodes of The Bad Batch, being Cookies 101 and Cookies 101A, which just so happened to be 2/3 of that show's premiere episode titled Aftermath, were bundled in the same bulk of episodes as the 12 Twins final season episodes. This makes sense when you consider that Twins 109, Old Friends Not Forgotten, used assets from Cookies 101 with models including Kanan, Depa Billaba, as well as using footage of the Battle of Kala, and Cookies 101 using models from Twins 101 and 109, including the models of Anakin, Obi-Wan and General Grievous. There were initially plans for the Siege of Mandalore to be screened in theatres, but these were scrapped due to the 2020 global pandemic. This could be why the arc featured the main Star Wars theme, and why it was edited as such, not having the aforementioned fortune cookies and narrations after its first episode. This could also be why they decided to go with the motion capture for the duel in episode 2, to appeal more to big screen viewers. There is a 2005 Dave Filoni sketch of Ahsoka's initial Ashla iteration, where she has a hood over her head, just like she does at the conclusion of this story arc. This story arc was a decent ending to the show overall, and while we got it just over 4 years after it was meant to release, the wait was well worth it. An issue I personally have is that though while we finally got to see this arc, we lost 10 other important stories that we were supposed to get beforehand. I personally think that the fates of the 3 main characters in this arc, being Ahsoka, Rex and Maul, would have been decided around whether or not Lucasfilm got to do more animated shows afterwards, which they would have known about by the time the story arc would have entered production, due to the 3 years between the story conference sessions and the final product. While it seems Lucas favoured the idea of making sure the non-Revenge of the Sith characters were killed off beforehand, it's always possible that he'd have let Dave Filoni keep Ahsoka, Rex and Maul alive. We also have to take into account that it's always possible that Maul would have again had his death undone later in production, like what happened at the end of The Lawless in Season 5. Maul could have also potentially gone on to be the villain in Lucas's sequel trilogy, or maybe even showed up in Star Wars Underworld. None of these decisions would have ever been fully agreed upon by the time of the show's cancellation, though, as things would have no doubt changed and evolved had the original version of the Siege of Mandalore actually entered production. And while it is indeed annoying that characters like Ventress and Cad Bane have had their character arcs artificially extended after their planned endings in Clone Wars, it is most likely their deaths were also planned around a time where they thought they'd possibly not get to do any more animated shows. I will, however, state that personally I don't feel like Cad Bane's usage in The Bad Batch and Book of Boba has been worth extending his character's life for 30 odd years, and wish they would have just finished his 4 episodes with Boba and had him go out there. If they ever do finish that arc, I will personally headcanon that he did die there for good, until they give Cad Bane a post-Clone Wars story that makes his life extension feel earned beyond a few cameos in The Bad Batch and an appearance 30 years later in the timeline to just die at Boba's hands again. As for Ventress, at the time of the making of this video, we are between animated shows, so I am holding out hope that they do her justice in whatever post-Clone Wars plans they have for her, and if not, then my headcanon will be the same as Cad Bane. I just hope they finish their last Clone Wars arcs one day, as while they're no longer their final story, they're still important parts of it, and I'd rather have a version of them on screen than none at all, which is the same way I feel with Ahsoka's Walkabout, because you can then envision what the version that would have been made during the original production had the show not been cancelled could have been. I think the reason they used Ventress's Dark Disciple Hill for Maul was ultimately down to the same reason they repurposed the Black Ace's interior for the Ghost in Rebels, because they thought they'd never get to use it for its intended purpose, probably not having the hindsight of the Bad Batch getting multiple seasons and having Ventress live post-Dark Disciple in late August 2018 when the design for the saber was created. I liked that they included Ahsoka's astromech droid R7A7 from earlier Clone Wars episodes in the final version of this arc, instead of non-specific medical droids as the draft scripts had at one stage, as it allowed Ahsoka to reconnect with who is essentially her version of R2. Even if the pair didn't get much interaction time, they were together just before she left the Order in Season 5. This story arc has an interesting eerie feeling to it, considering we know what's going to happen, but not when or how. I also like how this story makes it so that Vibes didn't completely die in vain, that thanks to him, Rex and Ahsoka were able to escape. One thing I personally don't like about this story arc is the motion capture duel, and that's because it looks out of place compared to the other duels in the show, with me preferring how they did Ventress's fight with the Bad Batch in the 3rd season of their show, with the movement being more in style with the rest of the movements within animation. I hope if they do go back and finish the unfinished story arcs with lightsaber duels, that they stick to the previous style of animated fighting, especially for my personal favourite duel that takes place in the Dark Disciple arc, between Ventress, Voss and Dooku on the Raxus building overlook. Thinking about the release of this arc in context to the 10 unfinished ones, knowing that the show was meant to have 8 full seasons, with Season 6 supposed to have between 22 to 25 episodes, Season 7 having 20, and the planned 8th season having the last 20, including the 4 that make up this arc, I can't help but feel the ending of the show as a whole was a little rushed, knowing that the Clone Wars had many more stories left to tell before it reached its conclusion. However, this story being finished does not prevent Lucasfilm from going back and completing those other 40 episodes. Having those episodes finished would only enrich this story arc, allowing us to see what happened to the characters that didn't appear in it, whose Clone Wars era had already finished before this story took place. I personally believe that when this quote final season and Bad Batch Season 1 were initially planned out, that Lucasfilm didn't know that Disney Plus would be their full-time home for Star Wars animation going forward, and mixed with limits and a split budget due to Lucasfilm Animation also working on Resistance at the same time for Disney XD, they weren't able to do a full season of Clone Wars or complete all of its then 52 unfinished episodes. If you add up the 12 Clone Wars episodes and the 18 Bad Batch Season 1 production episodes, you only get 30, which would have still been 22 episodes short, and Filoni, potentially not wanting to leave Clone Wars without a proper ending for essentially the third time, probably wanted to complete the Siege of Mandalore just in case they never got any more episodes ordered. This is before you take into account that a story arc like Son of Dathomir would have most likely cost more to make due to the sheer amount of battle sequences that take place within it. It was probably also a huge learning curve for Lucasfilm Animation going back to that Clone Wars style of animation, as well as it essentially being their first 2160p/4K project, which would have no doubt required more level of detail than the older 1080p/HD animated shows. By the time more animation episodes were ordered by Disney+, they'd have probably already locked in the Clone Wars and Bad Batch Season 1 episodes, and it would have been a weird decision to return to the Clone Wars so soon after doing a quote final season of it. But hopefully now that we know that they're capable of producing borderline 40 episodes of Clone Wars level animation, as seen with Bad Batch Season 2 and 3 and Tales of the Jedi and Empire, which amount to roughly the same amount of runtime as the unfinished Clone Wars arcs, that maybe we could see them get the same treatment these 12 2020 episodes did. As stated in my video on that topic, it doesn't have to particularly be marketed as Clone Wars Season 8 and onwards. 40 episodes of animation is enough for a show of their own if they would like to keep the finality of the Siege of Mandalore intact in terms of real-life season placement. By the looks of the Bad Batch Season 3, Lucasfilm Animation still seemed to have a lot less directors compared to the Clone Wars at the time of its March 2013 cancellation, with there having been 5 regular directors on the unfinished reels, not including Dave Filoni, who would usually direct a Clone Wars season finale involving Ahsoka, something he interestingly didn't do for the Siege of Mandalore Twins production, as he was instead credited as executive producer. While Filoni has said he personally doesn't want to work on more Clone Wars without Lucas, he also stated at one point that he didn't want to tell certain story arcs because they featured Lucas characters, but then he literally went on to tell Count Dooku's backstory in Tales of the Jedi, and last time I checked, Count Dooku was a major character created by Lucas for the prequel trilogy. Dave Filoni, who has moved up in Lucasfilm's hierarchy, doesn't necessarily have to work on the unfinished Clone Wars episodes as closely as he once did anyway. Their blueprints already exist, and there are many examples of other TV shows changing major people on their production team while continuing to produce the plans of the previous producers. A major example of this is with classic Doctor Who, which literally had entire seasons planned out by the outgoing producer, given to the next producer to carry to release. We have also seen this with other animated shows like how SpongeBob continued after Steven Hillenburg stepped back after the movie, and again after his unfortunate passing, and while the quality of those episodes are brought into question, this wouldn't be a problem with Clone Wars, considering all those story arcs were written while Lucas was executive producer. As well as the fact like key people including the head writer for those arcs, Matt Michnovetz, still works at Lucasfilm, with Matt being the story editor for the Bad Batch, and it's clear he cares about the unfinished arcs, considering he made sure to reference his unfinished Kashyyyk arc multiple times as having happened in Clone Force 99's past during their return episode to Kashyyyk in the Bad Batch Season 2. Hopefully they could allow him the opportunity to finalise all those stories he was involved with, including tweaking all of them to fit into the current continuity. While the Siege of Mandalore is indeed the end of the Clone Wars, I will always have hope for those 40 unfinished episodes and that they see the light of day. All these other popular shows like Regular Show are getting 40 odd episode orders despite having already been given borderline definitive endings, so why can't the Clone Wars have that treatment and allow Lucasfilm to finally finish all 10 unfinished arcs and close the book on the Clone Wars for good, as at the moment there are too many big chunks still missing in the Clone Wars characters on screen stories. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. And if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment. Until the next time, goodbye.